This is a very rich, philosophically juicy conversation, and it's going to piss off the hardcore atheists and the hardcore Christian fundamentalists, and that's fine, because cultural Christianity is the future, and that's based. So let's jump in. Here's Peterson criticizing the Christian fundamentalists who ask him, do you believe in God?
One of the things I've noticed, for example, is there are no shortage of Christian trolls, right? I mean, there are atheist trolls and there's engineering trolls, there's lots of trolls, but there are Christian trolls. And the Christian trolls, when they ask that question, and it's often the Christian trolls who ask that question, what they mean is, are you in my club?
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And my answer is, I'm not even sure you know what club you're in. I think Gospel of John closes with a statement that's something like, if all the books that were ever written were written about the gospel accounts, that wouldn't be enough books to explain what had happened.
Yeah, if all the things that Jesus did.
Yeah. And it's there's a truth in that. The truth is that profound religious account is bottomless. And the biblical representations are like that. There's no limit to the amount of investigation they can bear.
So this is where Peterson is starkly at odds with the Christian fundamentalists. It is absolutely the case that when people say, do you believe in God? It is a goofy question, because it's sort of like, do you believe in aliens? It's like, okay, that's one question. But then if you ask, do you believe in God? It's like, God exists outside of time and space, as Peterson will elucidate momentarily. So how can you use the same question to ask, well, do you believe in aliens in the same way that do you believe in God? It's like, God is a concept that transcends material reality. So what do we even mean when we're saying that?
But it does mean that whatever God is not in the natural world. Okay, now we can extend that. Not bound by time, not bound by space. Well, does that make God a material object? Because when people say, is God real, which is a variant of the question, is do you believe in God? It's like, well, God's immaterial and outside of time and space. So if your definition of real is material things in the domain of time and space, then we're not talking about the same thing.
And then in regards to the Gospels, he says there's no limit to the investigation that you can put into the Gospels, meaning Christian literalists who just read the Bible and just whatever their first interpretation is of, this word means this thing as I understand it, so that's what we're going to go with. It's why I don't trust Christian literalists. I think they're heathens, that they could just dare presume that they would read these words and say, well, that was my first impression and it says what it is and obviously it means this. It's like you do not have enough respect for the sophistication and the depth of these texts. It's also why I'm just not convinced and interested in Christian apologetics that much. I don't find it convincing to make a logical, literal case about, well, here's why you should believe in God based on these logical reasons. Personal testimony, people's actual experience with religion and bringing themselves closer to God or whatever they believe is God, that's much more compelling. It's much more human. It's much more deep and comprehensive and just outside the narrow domain of propositional, literal interpretation.
If I went back in time with a Panasonic video camera and put that camera in front of the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, would the little LCD screen show a man walk out of that tomb?
I would suspect yes.
So that to me seems like a belief in the historical event of the resurrection, or at least of Jesus leaving the tomb, which means that when somebody says, do you believe that Jesus rose from the dead? It doesn't seem clear to me why you're not able to just say, it would seem to me yes.
Because I have no idea what that means. And neither did the people who saw it.
Okay, that's pretty wild. I would not have expected Peterson to say probably in regards to Jesus literally walking out of the tomb. Now, the way that I think Peterson justifies all of this, vagary around the topic is Peterson, his whole thing is be precise in your speech, utter commitment to truth and to logos and all of that. And he's taken 7 grams of psychedelics multiple times. He's talked about it before. And as someone who's taken definitely not 7 grams of psychedelics, I'm very sympathetic to the mysteries of the universe being very difficult to put into words. And saying you believe in something does not necessarily mean you believe it literally happened as people understand it happened. The underlying problem here is it would be easier to take Peterson more seriously if he wasn't such a idiot on Twitter. You can't be the guy that says, you need to be precise in your speech. Words are powerful. They are the spirit of the logos. And then go on Twitter calling people bitches and shit. It's pathetic. So that's the disconnect here that I think everyone is rightfully pissed off at Peterson about for appearing all high and mighty in this esoteric spiritual sense and then just being an absolute fool on Twitter. And as far as Jesus leaving the tomb, I don't know what that means. You have to put yourself in Peterson's psychedelic worldview, which is not, I'm not denigrating that at all, but it's certainly one that is not amenable to propositional analysis. So if you were to ask me, I would say, no, probably not. Jesus didn't leave the tomb. Or maybe he did. I don't know. Maybe they were using some sort of magic trick. I don't know. Okay, here is perhaps what is the most important part of the conversation, because it gets at the fundamental divide between science and religion. And I would say almost all of our major political disputes are born out of this divide.
And this is part of this underlying materialist, atheist, enlightenment ethos. People think that fiction and fact are opposites. It's like, no, they're not.
Okay.
Not at all. Okay, so let's use an analogy to begin with. What's more real, things or numbers? Okay, now I'm not going to make a case for either of those positions. I'm just saying that's an actual question.
Yeah.
You talk to mathematicians, they think, well, numbers are way more real than things. Things are evanescent. They disappear. They flash in and out of existence. Numbers are permanent.
Yeah.
And then you could think about it biologically. It's like, well, how useful is numeracy to survival?
Yeah.
Like very, right? When you become numerate, you're powerful in a way that the mere grip you have on the individual facts doesn't afford at all. So there are forms of abstraction that are clearly more real than the things from which they're abstracted, or at least as real. I would say more real because they're so powerful. Well, fiction is an abstraction.
Sure.
So this is where usually the hardcore atheists will get mad at Peterson and say, well, he's redefining fiction to mean something like another form of truth. First off, just straight up etymologically, fact and fiction, or logic and myth is the other divide, are both referring to types of truth.
So in this ancient Greek world, there were two conceptions of truth: mythos, or muthos, as it would be originally, and logos. And mythos has given us the word myth, and logos has given us the word logic. But they believe that the big truths, the really deep truths, the great truths, could only be encompassed by poetry, by narrative, by what falls in the realm of myth. And that logic was the sort of thing that a lawyer would do in a courtroom to settle a dispute and decide how much money was owed by one person to another. So it operated on a much more trivial realm.
So when Peterson talks about fiction being abstracted from reality, obviously that makes sense. That's why we're able to resonate with stories. When we watch a fictional romance, we see aspects of real romance being played out in a distilled and more careful and clear format. And then when it comes to things like numbers, it's like, what's more real? Numbers or objects? And so in this sense, it's very easy for me to see the difference between fact and fiction as both hitting on types of truths. The problem with Peterson is then when he's asked about, well, okay, hold on, did Jesus literally walk out of his tomb? Well, he said here, probably yes. Props to Alex for getting that out of him. But again, it's like, well, I would take that a little bit more seriously and I'd have more reverence for that if he didn't, go off in all these crazy tangents in other ways. And I understand I'm harping on that, but I do think that Peterson's underlying philosophy here is valid. And I think it's a net negative that more people are not able to adopt it and appreciate it because of Peterson's personal failings. So that's why I keep bitching about it. This is my personal favorite part of the conversation, where Peterson gets into the evolutionary history and significance of memes.
Well, the Cain and Abel story is quite complex, because you could imagine easily that there was a fratricide at some point in the past that was of sufficient emotional magnitude to have stories aggregate around it, to have an account aggregate around it. So it's easiest to presume that because why not? It's perfectly plausible that a primordial murder of that sort happened in the memory of that tribal people and was represented in that manner. Now, as the account in Iliad has done a very good job of pointing out how this develops too. You could think of Iliad's work on the mythologization of stories as an extension of Dawkins' idea of the meme, because Iliad discusses in great detail how an account mutates to be maximally memorable across time. So it mutates. You can take, there is a core that's true, let's say in the narrow historical sense, but the account mutates to be optimally adapted to the structure of memory that characterizes the human psyche.
And that comes out in story, like the story of Cain and Abel.
Right. And you get a maximally memorable story. Now, that's a meme. Is it true? That's a hard question.
So the idea is cultural information has to get condensed and mutated into a form that grafts itself onto the human psyche in a more efficient way. We've all played the telephone game. Things get lost in translation, but certain things are more memorable than others because of their archetypal and emotional significance. Like if it was a story of a murder, that part probably wouldn't get lost in the translation. There's a good clip of Peterson talking about this with Susan Blackmore, I believe.
The meme idea is very interesting, and I do think that there are contagious ideas, but that needs to be chased down much deeper, because there are ideas that are so contagious that we've actually adapted to them biologically. And once that happens, they're no longer merely memes. They're something else. They're built into us.
So this is all about one of Peterson's fundamental ideas about the hero archetype. Evolution selects for traits that maximize survival, right? So animals that are able to see better are going to pass their genes on because their sight allows them to survive. But it's not just physical traits that are selected for, it's behaviors. So animals that are able to stick together and communicate socially about threats are more likely to survive than just a lone animal who, when he's asleep, he gets screwed. So the question is, what is the fundamental behavior that provides the maximum adaptive fitness, the maximum level of, adaptive fitness? And that is technically heroic behavior that we would regard as heroic, behavior that is captured by the mythologies of heroes, is the behavior that is most conducive to survival, and therefore evolution selected for that behavior in human beings. And that happened over such a long period of time that we became adapted to those stories that mutated in such a way to be grafted onto our psychology, which is why we resonate with stories, which is why stories that have archetypal themes like heroic behavior, battles between good and evil, love, romance, all the things that evolution selected for as increasing fitness, we resonate with those. And that's what makes the memes stick. Now, are they true? That goes back to the numbers versus objects. Well, are the numbers more real or the objects? Are the stories of heroic behavior and the heroism more real than the people embodying it? Well, it's a further distillation of that behavior, so who knows? Here's Alex O'Connor explaining why debating like Destiny is not necessarily the ideal strategy all the time.
Well, what are we about to do here? A debate. We're about to debate an issue, and I'm going to try to win. And that's, and not even, I mean, maybe there's sort of an element of pride in there. You want to win for that sake, but also you really think, well, I want to win because I think I'm right about this, and if I don't, then, I must have just not expressed myself properly. I think what I probably meant when I was saying that is that I would have had more of that cap on than now, after having so many conversations with so many people and realizing that not only is it more constructive for myself, I've learned a lot more. And now I'm here like, hey, I might learn something today. That would be great. Even if I just learn something about what your worldview is.
This reminds me of Peterson's comments on the debate with Destiny.
I had the most qualms about that podcast of any podcast I've done. Well, the reason is see, I learned this when I was like 24. I learned that I had a proclivity to battle verbally to be right.
Okay.
Right. And that was a status thing. I'm right, you're wrong. So, that redounds to my credit. I use my verbal intelligence as a weapon of dominance. Well, I stopped doing that when I was like 23. I thought, oh, that's the prideful worship of the Luciferian intellect. It's a really bad idea. Like, seriously, it's a seriously bad idea. And so I don't like talking to people who want to be right. And Destiny wants to be right.
Yeah, I think it's self-evident that Destiny just tries to win. And look, he's a sociopathic truth machine. That's what I've said. He absolutely goes after the truth and uses propositional logic to determine who's right. And that's very, very good. And everyone benefits. I don't care if Peterson feels bad about it, because Destiny got Peterson to reveal his foolishness when he talked about excess deaths and being like, well, of course, there's no other explanation for why, a lot of extra people in Europe died. I'm sure it's a possibility that there could be something wrong with the medical techniques, but whatever. The point is, from a personal perspective, it's obviously bad for Destiny to live his entire life online and involve everyone in his drama and make all of his drama public. He has no privacy. He's not living a human life. It's entirely psychologically unhealthy. We benefit. Great. It's like, if you want to strap a bomb to yourself on behalf of the cause of truth, good for you. It's going to kill you, obviously, but we're going to benefit. And so, I'm definitely grateful, and certainly all of Peterson's fans and Destiny's fans all benefit when that type of debate occurs, but there is also the unseen cost to Destiny, and also the people who watch him who think that that's an optimal way to live life. This has been great stuff. We're well on the way to reconciling science and religion. Until then, good luck and Godspeed.